Ever stumble upon a simple brain teaser that just cracks open a whole world of complex thinking?
Oh, definitely.
That's kind of what the trolley problem does for ethics, right?
It really does. It throws you right into this dilemma.
Mhm.
Okay, do you sacrifice one person to save, say, 5 others from a runaway trolley?
It's a classic.
A cornerstone thought experiment, yeah. So for this deep dive, we've really dug into the material you shared to try and figure out why this scenario sticks with us.
And what it tells us about how we make those tough calls, about right and wrong.
Exactly. And it's not just some, abstract puzzle for philosophers.
No, it keeps popping up everywhere. Ethics, obviously, but
Yeah.
also psychology, even AI programming now.
Right. Because at its heart, it gets at this really fundamental tension in how we think about morality.
You mean the sort of clash between...
Yeah, the push and pull between trying to get the best overall outcome that's utilitarianism, basically.
Right, maximizing well-being.
And then on the other hand, sticking to certain moral rules or duties,
Yeah.
Don't kill regardless of the consequences, that's more deontology.
Okay, let's dive into the original setup then. The classic trolley problem.
Okay, so you've got a trolley, it's out of control, speeding down a track towards 5 people who are tied up or stuck.
And you happen to be standing near a switch, a lever.
Exactly. And you can pull that lever, divert the trolley onto a sidetrack.
But the catch is...
There's one person on that sidetrack.
So pull the lever, one person dies, but 5 live. Don't pull it, 5 die, but the one person is safe.
And the fascinating thing is, when people are surveyed, most choose to flip the switch.
Yeah, something like 90% I read. It seems logical, I guess. 1 death instead of 5.
Precisely. The initial sort of gut reaction for many is that calculation. Minimize the harm, save more lives.
But this is where it gets complicated, isn't it?
This is where it gets really interesting, because then you introduce variations, like the fat man or footbridge scenario.
Right. Same runaway trolley, same 5 people in danger.
No, but this time, there's no switch. You're standing on a footbridge over the tracks next to a large person.
Okay.
And the only way to stop the trolley and save the 5 people is to push this large person off the bridge onto the track below.
Oh, wow.
Their body will stop the trolley, saving the 5, but obviously.
Killing the person you pushed.
Exactly. And this scenario, it feels completely different to most people.
Yeah, suddenly that willingness to intervene just plummets. Most people say they wouldn't push the person.
Even though the numbers are the same, sacrifice 1 to save 5.
So what changes? Why does actively pushing someone feel so much worse than flipping a switch?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That's what sparks all the debate. And it turns out these kinds of sacrificial dilemmas aren't entirely new.
Oh, really?
Yeah, our sources mention similar thought experiments cropping up even earlier, like one from 1905 involving a switchman whose own child was on the sidetrack.
Oh, heavy.
And even a TV play from the 50s about a military decision in the Korean War bomb this area to save that one sort of thing.
So the core idea, this terrible choice, has been around.
It seems so. And then philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson really honed in on it, modifying the scenarios.
What was her angle?
She used it to explore the difference between, our duty to save people versus our duty not to kill people. Positive versus negative duties.
Okay. Is flipping the switch seen as saving, while pushing is seen as killing?
That's kind of the intuition many people have, yeah. And the variations keep coming. What about the fat villain scenario?
How does that one go?
Same footbridge setup, but the large person you could push isn't an innocent bystander. They're actually the villain who put the 5 people in danger in the first place.
Uh-huh. So now pushing them feels more like justice.
Kind of, yeah. Or at least people seem much more willing to push the villain off the bridge than the innocent bystander. It introduces this idea of maybe deservedness or retribution.
It's amazing how adding one detail can shift the moral landscape so much.
Completely. And the sources push this further, right? They bring up examples like a surgeon thinking about taking organs from one healthy patient to save 5 others.
Which sounds horrifying, obviously.
Absolutely. Or a president deciding whether to, say, authorize an attack on one location to prevent a bigger catastrophe elsewhere.
It shows how this isn't just a quirky thought experiment. The basic dilemma echoes in some really serious, real-world decisions.
Exactly. These variations help us unpack the different ethical frameworks we use, sometimes without even realizing it.
Okay, so let's talk about those frameworks. You mentioned deontology earlier.
Right. Deontology is all about rules and duties. Certain actions are just fundamentally right or wrong, regardless of the consequences.
Like, thou shalt not kill.
Pretty much. So from a strict deontological view, intentionally causing harm, like physically pushing the man off the bridge is wrong. Full stop. Even if it saves more lives.
Because the act itself violates a core moral rule.
Precisely. Then you have the flip side. Utilitarianism or consequentialism.
Where it's all about the outcome.
Exactly. The morally right action is the one that produces the best overall consequences, the greatest good for the greatest number.
So, for a utilitarian, flipping the switch in the first scenario is almost a no-brainer.
Generally, yes. Saving 5 lives at the cost of 1 leads to a better net outcome. Pushing the man might also be justified on purely utilitarian grounds, though it often feels more uncomfortable.
But it's not always that simple, is it? There are nuances even within these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Take the doctrine of double effect.
Double effect, what's that?
It's the idea that an action with both a good and a bad effect might be permissible if the bad effect wasn't your intended outcome, but just a foreseen side effect.
Okay, how does that apply here?
Well, someone might argue that when you flip the switch, your primary intention is to save the 5. The death of the one person on the side track is a foreseen but unintended consequence.
So you don't want them to die, it's just an unavoidable part of saving the others. Unlike the footbridge, where pushing them is the direct means to the end.
That's the argument, yes.
Yeah.
It tries to draw a moral distinction there. Then there's another idea, the doctrine of distributive exemption.
Distributive exemption. Sounds complex.
It basically suggests it's okay to redirect an existing threat to harm fewer people.
So the trolley is already a threat.
Right. It exists independently of you.
Yeah.
By flipping the switch, you're just redistributing the harm that was already going to happen, making it less severe overall.
You're not creating the harm, just managing it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And even within utilitarianism, there's a split.
Between...
Act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism.
Okay, what's the difference?
Act utilitarianism says you should evaluate each specific action based on its immediate consequences. Does this act maximize good right now?
So flick the switch, push the man if the numbers work out in that instance.
Potentially, yes. But rule utilitarianism takes a step back. It asks, what are the consequences if we adopted a general rule? Like, always sacrifice one innocent person if it saves more lives.
That sounds dangerous. It could be. A rule utilitarian might worry that such a rule would create fear, undermine trust, or erode respect for individual rights in the long run, even if it seems optimal in a specific case.
So they look at the bigger picture, the societal impact of the rule itself.
Exactly. And then you have other perspectives too, like Gayworth's rights-based theory mentioned in the sources.
What does that add?
Gayworth emphasizes fundamental rights, especially to freedom and well-being. From this view, deliberately violating someone's right to life, even for a good cause, is highly problematic. Protecting basic rights might take precedence over maximizing overall good.
So many different ways to slice this ethically.
It really shows the complexity. But, the trolley problem itself isn't without its critics.
Right. Some sources raised issues with it as a tool.
Yeah, one strong point is that it might be more like an ethical Rorschach test.
Meaning
It mainly reveals the ethical beliefs you already have, rather than helping you solve a genuine dilemma. It's so abstract, stripped of real-world context.
Yeah, it's very artificial, isn't it? Like, how often are you actually standing by a conveniently placed lever next to a runaway trolley?
Precisely. And that artificiality, sometimes the scenarios get a bit absurd, which critics argue reduces its psychological realism.
Yeah.
Does it really tell us how we'd act in a real high-stakes moral situation?
Probably not directly, and I found it interesting that one source mentioned humor.
Yes. Especially with the fat man scenario.
Apparently people find it funnier than the switch scenario, which feels weird.
It does. But maybe that humor creates emotional distance. If you find it slightly ridiculous, maybe you don't engage with the moral weight of it as deeply, it might skew the responses.
It's like the absurdity shields you a bit, and real life is just never that neat.
Never. Real ethical choices are embedded in thick context relationships, history, responsibilities, unforeseen consequences. Stuff the trolley problem just strips away.
And apparently even the language used to present the problem can change how people respond.
Yes. Which points to a strong emotional component in our moral judgments, one that's maybe more easily influenced than we think.
There was also the point about doing nothing.
Right. Is inaction sometimes the most ethical choice? If you intervene, you become directly responsible for someone's death. If you do nothing, you haven't directly caused it, even if more people die.
That's a heavy thought. The burden of action versus inaction.
It really highlights that tension. And it exposes the clash between the problem's theoretical simplicity, just count the bodies, right?
Hmm.
And the real world's messy complexity, where relationships and rights matter deeply.
We have to be careful applying it too literally to things like healthcare rationing or political decisions.
Absolutely. One source made a powerful point comparing it to something like the decision to drop atomic bombs. The trolley problem offers zero perspective from the victims, none of the historical context, none of the...
In some ways. But it's found this new relevance, hasn't it, with self-driving cars?
Ah, yes, autonomous vehicles. This is where the trolley problem has suddenly become very practical, very urgent.
Because programmers literally have to decide what the car should do in an unavoidable accident scenario.
Exactly. Should the car swerve to hit one pedestrian to avoid hitting 5? Should it prioritize the safety of its own occupants above all else? Or should it calculate the minimum loss of life, even if that means sacrificing the occupants?
It's the trolley problem, but written in code.
Pretty much. And there's a huge debate. Should we program AI with utilitarian ethics? Make it perform that cold calculation?
Can we even do that reliably?
It's incredibly difficult. How do you standardize ethics for machines across countless unpredictable situations? Some argue strongly against trying to pre-program answers for these genuine dilemmas. The real world is too complex.
And the law is different for humans. Right?
That's another key point from the sources. A human driver, in a sudden, unavoidable emergency, might make a split-second choice to minimize harm and might not be held legally culpable for the outcome.
Because it was an impossible situation.
Right. But that's a nuanced, after-the-fact judgment based on human limitations and intentions. Translating that kind of complex legal and moral reasoning into proactive code for a machine, that's a whole different challenge.
Yeah, you can't just program a reasonable panic decision.
Not easily, no.
Yeah.
The existing frameworks don't map neatly onto AI.
Okay, so shifting from the philosophical and the programming side, what about the empirical research? What have studies actually found about how people respond?
Well, we mentioned the basic finding. About 90% say they'd flip the switch.
But that changes.
Drastically.
Yeah.
If the one person on the sidetrack is, say, your child or your partner, far fewer people are willing to sacrifice them to save the 5 strangers.
That makes intuitive sense. Personal ties matter.
Oh.
A lot.
Hugely. It shows our moral decisions aren't purely abstract calculations. Relationships weigh heavily.
And what about brain science? Have they looked at what's happening inside our heads?
They have, using fMRI brain scans.
Yeah.
And they find different patterns of brain activity for different scenarios.
Like the switch versus the footbridge.
Exactly. The footbridge scenario, pushing the man, tends to light up brain areas associated more with emotion and social cognition.
Whereas the switch is maybe more calculation-focused.
It seems that way, involving areas linked more to reasoning and cognitive control. It suggests our emotional response is a key factor in why pushing feels different, more wrong to many people.
So it's not just logic, it's our gut feelings, our emotional brain reacting strongly.
Very much so. And other factors play a role too, according to the research.
Like what?
Things like how stressed you are, the overall emotional mood you're in, whether you know other people are watching you decide.
Oh, being observed changes things.
Oh, it can, yeah. And even things like levels of certain neurochemicals, serotonin and oxytocin, seem to correlate with different moral judgments in these kinds of tests.
Yeah. And they've even tried it in virtual reality.
Yes, VR studies try to make it more immersive, more realistic, see what people actually do, not just what they say they do.
Do actions match judgments?
Not always. Sometimes there's a gap. People might say they wouldn't push the person, but in the heat of the VR moment, maybe they do, or vice versa. It adds another layer of complexity.
And that humor thing with the footbridge scenario came up in research too.
It did. Consistently, people seem to find the fat man scenario, despite its grim nature, slightly more humorous than the switch scenario. Again, maybe suggesting a different kind of psychological engagement or detachment.
So all this research basically underlines that human moral decision-making is messy.
It's incredibly complex, influenced by logic, emotion, context, relationships, even our brain chemistry. The trolley problem is a great starting point for thinking about ethics, but we shouldn't mistake responses to it for a complete picture of real-world morality.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems like the trolley problem, even though it looks simple on the surface, just explodes into this huge web of ethical questions.
It really does. It forces us to confront those big tensions. Duty versus consequences, intention versus outcome, the value of one life versus many.
And there clearly aren't any easy answers. Different frameworks give you different conclusions.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the point. The real value isn't finding the right answer to the trolley problem, if one even exists.
It's more about the process.
Yeah, the process of thinking critically about our own gut feelings, the principles we think we live by, and how we weigh different values when they come into conflict.
It definitely makes you pause and think about why you react differently to flipping a switch versus pushing someone, even if the result 1 dead, 5 saved is mathematically the same.
Exactly. That self-reflection is key.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this.
Right.
How does wrestling with these abstract, sometimes strange dilemmas actually help us understand the real ethical challenges we face?
Yeah, in our own lives, in our communities, as a society. How does exploring this help you navigate your own moral landscape when things get tough and the choices aren't clear-cut? What principles really guide you then?